So, past few weeks, we have been working our way through this narrative that Luke wrote in the New Testament. If you've got a Bible, do open it to chapter 1. We're taking our time up to Christmas. We're not rushing it. We are, we're going to get to, Christmas obviously is the incarnation, Jesus coming and so on. And so we're going to follow the narrative through over this term. Then we'll probably take a pause from it and we'll come back to Luke again. And we want to spend time allowing this story, as it were, to work on us. Because that's what the Bible is meant to do, actually. It's meant to kind of work on our lives. And a few weeks ago, I did an introduction, and then Chris shared about the introduction to Luke itself, which is written to this guy called Theophilus. And Luke sort of says, look, I've carefully investigated this stuff. He's trying to say that you can actually trust the story. This isn't sort of some fairy tale that's kind of developed over time, or a myth that's developed over time. Often that's a popular opinion that's out there. That doesn't make sense of what we got in the narratives. He's saying this is a story you can trust. We were eyewitnesses to it. And last week, then Tom spoke on this story, this sort of lead up to the coming of Christ. He talked about Zacharias and Elizabeth, this couple they weren't able to have children. They were barren. And it's interesting with the Bible, this theme of barrenness. We're going to touch on a few things today, come right through the scriptures. So this couple, and they can't have a child, but then they get visited by an angel. And I get it if you kind of go, whoa, hang on a minute, so angels, we'll get there. But, and announcing that, no, you're going to have a child, and it's going to be called John. And interesting in that story, Tom talked about seclusion and this sense of silence, because in the waiting for it, Zacharias, he kind of didn't really believe this was going to happen or God could do it. And God said, well, you're going to be mute. You're not going to be able to say anything for a while until this baby's born. What I find fascinating about that is that because it was his failure, his not believing, his doubts, even in that, God somehow kind of ups the ante of the story. It's kind of like even more pregnant with anticipation. It's not only Elizabeth that's pregnant, the whole story is, and everyone's going, well, who is this child then? John, can you tell us? And he's like, can't. Something's gone on. And I just imagine that story spread from person to person to person to person. Something is going on here. Something is building here. Who is this one who is going to come after John? And so it's a little bit like, and the story we're going to read today, that there are kind of clues in the story if you know what you're looking for. And culturally, maybe we're not familiar with those so much when we read these stories, and we can kind of get a bit stuck on them. I think, well, what's that got to do with that? And I don't understand how this all sort of links. It's a little bit like, though, if you imagine when you walk out this building this morning, and on the street you find loads of people sort of putting up flags or banners or bunting, and they're putting it up on the street. I imagine you'd be thinking, okay, these signs and these symbols, they say something. Someone's coming. Who is it? Who's going to be coming to this street in the next day or so, or whatever it might be? And it's a bit like that as we read through these verses. And we're going to read Luke chapter 1, verse 26 to 38. And it's the story of, maybe you know the story of Mary, and how God says to her, you are going to bear a child. And so let's read the story together. Luke chapter 1, verse 26 to 38. And you might want to just listen out and think about the things, see what sort of goes, oh yeah, that's a sort of sign, that's a clue to something. We're meant to kind of think about who this child is going to be through what is being said. It says this, now in the 6th month, that's the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the descendants of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. Coming in, he said to her, greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you. But she was perplexed at this statement and kept pondering what kind of salutation, I like the word here in the NASB, salutation, greeting, this was that the angel was giving. The angel said to her, don't be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor or grace with God, and behold, you will receive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall name him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will have no end. So Mary said to the angel, fair question, how can this be, since I'm a virgin? The angel answered and said to her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And for that reason, the holy child shall be called the Son of God. And behold, even your relative Elizabeth, she's also conceived a son in her old age, and she was called barren. The one who was called barren is now in her 6th month. For nothing will be impossible with God. And Mary said, behold, the bondslave, or the servant of the Lord, may it be done to me according to your word. And then the angel made an exit. So I wonder what you picked up in that, or whether you're kind of going, maybe you're new to church, you've never read the Bible particularly, maybe you sort of know what Christmas is about, but a lot of these names and sort of claims, as it were, about this child, all that was kind of going on here, you may be, I just don't know really, it doesn't make much sense to me. Or maybe you're going through it going, yeah, that reinforces that, and that's because of that. Well, I want to kind of do a little bit of a dot to dot, as it were, with you, to kind of help us through it. So we've got on the screen here, can we put it on full? So this is a dot to dot. You can't actually see that at all, can you? Wow, I was going to ask you to guess what that is. It was clearer on my screen. Okay. Can you guess what it is? Does anybody want to take a random guess? Huh? A corner? What? Yeah? Oh, no, you can see it more clearly on this screen, actually, can't you? Okay, yeah. You want to all come over here and have a look at this? Yeah, Simon, I knew you would. Simon, there you go, mate. Come on. A map of Asia. No, you can sit down. Anyone else want to guess? We're going to be here a long time. Can you guess? No? Anyone else want to have one more go? Come on, someone. Come on. I'm going to choose someone if not. Tom, come and have a go. You knew I would. Come on. Maybe squint a little bit. I know what it is, so it's fairly obvious. A person. Okay, we're getting there. Okay. We're getting closer. Go on. I've given the sweets away, so you're not getting them. It's not the Grinch. Now, okay, next slide. Hopefully this will be the one that makes it clear. Yay! There we go. It's a playing card. It's the King of Diamonds. That's right, isn't it? The King of Diamonds. Now, the point of this is that a passage like this can be like the first slide and a bit kind of fuzzy in what is going on here. Whereas once we understand and we start to join the dots of the whole story of the Bible, going right back actually to sort of Genesis and right through this story, the picture actually goes, oh, right, that's what we're meant. This is what's happening here. This is who we are, is being talked about in the passage that we read, and the angel comes to Mary. Does that make sense? And if we don't join, it's just going to be a bit blurry. And so there's 3 things I want to say. The sort of title of this is Jesus is the one. There's 3 things. He's the one you've been waiting for. He's the one true king. And he's the one who is worthy of worship. A chap called David Foster Wallace, I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a writer, a novelist, pretty well known. One of his books, I think, sold more than 1 million copies, called Infinite Jest or something. We should put the quote on the screen, actually. It should come up there. He says this about worship. Everybody worships. And this guy's not a Christian, as far as I know at all. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money or things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. You worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally plant you. You worship power, you will feel weak and afraid. And you will need ever more power over others to keep that fear at bay. If you worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. I think that he kind of hits the nail on the head there. It's not a question of whether we worship or not, whether we give our lives for something or someone. The question really is what or who and why. Why that thing or why that person do you give your life for? Because we'll all give our lives for something. We all live our lives for someone, as it were. Now, he says in that quote that I think that the best thing to do is just kind of choose something sort of God or spiritual, and kind of make a choice out of the plethora of options that are kind of out there. I think that the part of the problem of that is that they can't all be true at the same time. It's just as simple as that. You know, one of my very simple ways, and I've probably said this loads of times, is that I just don't think we get to choose what happens when we die. I actually think the same thing happens to every single human on the planet, and I think that that is logical. We don't get to choose the way we're born. Being born into this world, I just don't think we can sort of choose ultimate reality and truth, that somehow we can make that and go, well, I believe that, and so it's going to happen. I don't think that makes sense, actually. And so they could all be wrong, fair enough. Or they could all be partially right and sort of, well, you know, who knows really, and we'll never really know. And Jesus kind of comes on the scene as we'll work our way through Luke, this child that's being promised here, and he makes these outrageous claims that he is the way, that he is the life, he is the truth, that no one, I mean, no one means no one. No one comes to the Father except through the Son. That's what Jesus said. No one is going to do that. There's no other way. Now, again, people go, oh, but that's just bigoted. It's being exclusive. And I'm like, well, yeah. Every worldview is exclusive and excludes other things. This sort of thought that inclusivity means kind of like you can include everything. You can't. Even inclusivity in the way it's put forward in our culture is exclusive because it excludes the exclusivists. Get that? That's true. So it doesn't make sense. The question is what reality? Why worship? And who do we worship? And therefore, why Jesus? Well, I want to pull a few things out from this verse here. First of all, like I said, he's the one that you've been waiting for. I don't know what you're like at waiting. Feel a bit uncomfortable. Like, oh, silence. I've got to actually think, oh, we don't like waiting very much, do we? We're not very good at it. Well, there was this old boy, and he lived in Jerusalem, and he was waiting. And there's an old man, and we're going to read about him later in chapter 2, called Simeon. And it says that he was waiting for the consolation or the comfort of Israel. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, when we console someone, what do? We sort of come alongside them, don't we? We want to bring that comfort, maybe in a time of disappointment or grief. We want to come and try and sort of bring a sense of maybe even hope to someone who's feeling downcast or whatever it might be. We want to console. And so Simeon here is waiting for the consolation, not of an individual, the comfort to come, but of a whole nation, Israel. So why do they need that? Why do they need consolation? Why do they need comfort? Well, this is where we've got to go back right to the beginning in Genesis when we read the story of how God made us in his image to be in relationship with him. And it talks about the Garden of Eden. And without going into, I realize there's a ton of questions around Genesis, but just think of it this way for now, that this is about humanity being with God, his presence with us having access to God, with him. But the Bible tells the story how we want our self-rule. We don't want to live under his loving kind of kingship and care, but actually want to do things our way. And so it tells this story how Adam and Eve, these representatives of all of humanity, how they are sort of exiled. And this word will come again, to be exiled, set out, put apart from God's presence, put out from it, put far away. They're kind of exiled from the garden. And when you think the garden, think a little bit about temple, if you know your Old Testament, the place of God's presence. And so they're exiled out of the garden. They've lost access to God. They've lost presence of God. God, in many ways, here it's telling the story, he's beyond our reach. And so one of the dots that kind of gets joined as you work your way through, and in fact, even in Simeon's story, if you turn over to chapter 2, and you read about that consolation and comfort that he is saying, the consolation and comfort of Israel. If you think about, well, what does that mean biblically? Well, you go back to places like Isaiah chapter 40, verse 1, where you've got kind of after, I think it's Hezekiah, who's a king, and a lot of the kings didn't do very well. And basically, God says to Hezekiah that, look, the people are going to be taken into captivity, and they're going to be taken away. And then in Isaiah chapter 40, you've got this comfort my people, console them. Even in the face of this terrible thing that's going to happen because of the way that they've lived, he said, I want to bring comfort to you. And so again, there's a little dot that gets joined back to Isaiah. Something's going to happen. There's going to be end of their exile. It talks about in Isaiah 40, a shepherd that is going to come and tend the sheep, his people. Okay, so someone is coming. He's the one you've been waiting for. He is going to be the one to put it right. And Simeon, this old boy in Jerusalem, with the help of the Holy Spirit of God, he starts to join the dots and says, this vulnerable baby, this is it. This is the one we've been waiting for, the Christ, the Messiah. Now look, we don't need a rescuer unless we think something's wrong with us. Yeah, we all know that there is something wrong with humanity. It's why we strive for things. And so, he's saying, I can see in this dependent child the one who's going to come and put it right. And so when we read the story of Mary, one of the things she says, he's going to be called Jesus. And you're like, duh, that's obvious. We knew that. Well, Jesus, what does Jesus mean? Jesus means the God who saves. God is our salvation. And again, these allusions back to the Old Testament, to Joshua, because that's the Hebrew for Jesus, the God who saves, the God of our salvation. So there's all these kind of clues here. And so the other kind of thing that we read here that I want to focus on rather than these other names is in verse 32, where it says, the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, so speaking about kingship, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. So I want to follow these join these dots to do with kingship, all right? And again, you go all the way back to Abraham. And to Abraham, who God gets hold of, he starts to take this man and says, right, you're going to leave this nation, you're going to come to me. He makes a promise with him, and he makes promises to Abraham, then he makes promises to Jacob as well. And then later on, Jacob, if you know the story, Jacob has 12 sons, and one of those 12 sons is called Judah, and they become the 12 tribes of Israel. And Judah, even though he's the fourth-born son, well, he gets kind of the firstborn blessing, all right? That's the way kind of God works. Doesn't choose the obvious necessarily. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because you see this line of kingship coming through Abraham, Jacob, and Judah as well. There's promised king. There's going to be a promised king who is coming. In fact, it says to Abraham and Jacob that kings will come from you. God says to Judah, the scepter, it will not depart from you. That speaks about kingship and rule. So we kind of get this line. You see this kingship here. It's being spoken to about Jesus. It's spoken through the entire Old Testament. And then you come to this David. He's going to be given the throne of David. Well, what does that mean? Who's David? And why is that important? Well, David is the king of the tribe of, take a guess, Judah. Oh, right, there's a lineage thing. There's a line coming. There's connections. There's dots being drawn here. He's in the line of Judah. And he's kind of like the top of the kings. He's like the goat of kings in the Old Testament. The goat means greatest of all time, yeah? That's what he is. Think of him like that, the goat of kings. He's kind of the pinnacle in the Old Testament. But it says that, well, Jesus is going to be given his throne because, well, what does a good king do? Well, what does a good king do? Well, they should use their power and their authority and their ability and everything they have to care for people, for their protection, for their good. to enable us to flourish, to even give laws and ways of living that are good for humanity, yeah? Do you get that? Are you with me? Yeah? Hopefully. And so God makes a covenant with King David. And when you think of covenant, I think as Keller puts it this way, which I think is really helpful. He says, think about marriage. When you think of the word covenant, you're going to come across that a lot in the Bible. If you read the Bible, you're going to read about covenant. And he says it's a blend of law and love. I like that. He says, sort of think marriage. Yeah, when I got married to my wonderful wife, Jean, we made vows, promises to each other. Two of us are committed to one another in that way. And it's not just we love each other, but it's been enshrined in law because it's so precious, because it's so important. These two parties coming together. And when the Bible speaks about covenant with God, it speaks about God kind of as the king who promises to care, protect, love us, basically give himself for your flourishing and my flourishing in life. And for us, the servants of the king, it's loyalty. It's living his ways. And this kind of two thing, that's how the covenant works. And so God gives David this promise, this covenant, he says in 2 Samuel, so we're moving forward in the Old Testament. 2 Samuel 7:16 says, your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. So you see what we've read about Jesus? You'll be given the throne of David. It's a throne that's going to endure. There's a rule that's going to endure, and it's going to go on forever. This is another kind of dot that is joined in the picture. So those reading this for the first time who kind of knew these links with the Old Testament would have been going, oh, right, this is important. This could be the one who is promised. This could be the time that we are going to be delivered out from rule of our oppressors. So it was a big deal when they read these words. And then it's David's son Solomon. If you know the story, he builds a temple, dwelling place of God, with people, God with us again, God's presence. Again, Garden of Eden, you've got this flowing through. Same covenant he gives to Solomon. Says you're going to have a throne, it'll be established forever. But then he gives him a warning. He says to Solomon, if you don't keep your end of this, I'm going to keep mine. But if you don't keep your end of the covenant, if you run after other gods, then this house, this temple, this, as it were, Eden, will become a house of ruins. And sadly, as God goes, as goes the king, goes the people. The story goes downhill, the kingdom later on, if you read through 1 and 2 Kings, these stories of the different kings that came and went. And there were some good ones in there, but there were some pretty awful kings. And as representatives of the people, that's the way the nation went as well. And it kind of went downhill, really, to the point where you've got these 12 tribes who were originally 12 brothers. They're torn apart. They're split. Israel becomes 10 tribes, and they eventually get carried off by the Assyrians, this kind of massive global power. And then a bit later on, you've got these final 2 tribes of Judah, I think, and Benjamin, and they get carried off to Babylon, again, into exile. So now you've got the people of God are exiled. They're away from the presence of God. They can't get back to God. What they thought maybe David would do didn't happen. But even when they're in a dark place, there's promises of this restored king. Daniel, who is this guy that we went through Daniel recently, and he was known as a prophet of when they were in exile, when they were away from their home. I don't know what you think it's like. Do you like being away from home for long periods? I don't. I like being home. Imagine how they felt, 70 years, taken into captivity against your will. I mean, this happens today. Awful. And it's no wonder that they started like Psalm 137 when their captors are mocking them, saying, go on, sing some songs about God, this God deliverer. Sing some songs about him, the one who's going to save you, the one who's going to rescue, the one who's with you always. And they're mocking the Israelites when they're in Babylon. And Psalm 137 says that how can we sing the songs of the Lord when we're in this captivity? So how do we do this? And so it's a dark time. It's a moment where actually they'd had hope, but it's kind of been shattered. And even when they come back from exile, they come back into the land, they rebuild another temple, but still the people are scattered. Most of that time up to Jesus, they were ruled over by other kings, oppressing kings. And finally, when Mary this angel comes to her. Well, who's ruling over them then? The Romans. Oh, another oppressive regime. So this isn't looking good, is it? I hope you've kind of managed to follow the dots through. I know there's a lot there. I do understand that. And it's worth kind of going back over this again, maybe in your life groups, to kind of track this through yourself. Because it shows like, well, this one who's coming, it's the ultimate king that you have been waiting for. And it's into these contexts that, to Joseph and Mary. And Joseph was a descendant of David, who's a descendant of Judah, who's a descendant of, so this promise of a king. Kings are going to come from you. I used the illustration a few weeks ago of old films when light hits the screen, when they used to have it that way, and suddenly what seems a bit blurry, a bit like the picture of the dot-to-dot thing, well, I can't make sense of that. Suddenly, oh. And so that's why the Bible says that if you want to know what God looks like, look at Jesus. He's the exact representation, it says. You may find that an outrageous claim, an untrue claim. I don't know what you think. But it is what is claimed. And it's not just this one-off little bit in this one little story in Luke. It's the whole story of the Bible. The picture of this true king starts to emerge on our screen. So he's the one true king. That's my second point. Don't worry, these are going to be slightly shorter. See, with the build-up you get as well that we just had, you'd expect a king like maybe Chris Hemsworth, that kind of king, coming. Well, man, who's coming? It's going to be a Thor-like king. It's going to be he's going to deal with the Romans. He's going to smash them out of, our country. He's going to kind of put everything right. But what you get is not this. I mean, it's a little bit like this. The story takes a bit of a turn. So if you notice that the last story was Zacharias and Elizabeth, the angel comes to them when they were in Jerusalem, in the temple. That's kind of like the center stage. In this story, it's to Mary who's in Nazareth, and Nazareth, if you know your geography of Israel, is way up north. That's a bad example, sorry. I apologize to any northerners in the room. Sorry, and online. But it's up north. It's like in the back of end of nowhere. It's a little, I think, what would it be the equivalent? I think it would be the equivalent of Taylor Swift. Any Swifties in the room? I'm not putting my hand up. But it's not, don't be ashamed. It's fine. Emily, are you not a Swiftie? Oh, it's S Club 7, isn't it? Yeah, no, sorry. I'm kidding. Anyway, it's kind of the equivalent. Taylor Swift announces she's going to be coming to the UK, and she announces the only place that she is going to be playing is Poringland Village Hall. That's it. It's like, well, hang on, this is the biggest announcement. Why not in Jerusalem? Why not in the kind of center stage? Why in Nazareth? And it starts to get this theme of humility that you start to see coming through. This isn't any ordinary king. This might not be the king that we want necessarily even. We're kind of expecting, but he's a bit different. And so we see he comes to Mary, this poor young girl. I hope the next picture should be a picture of that's called the Annunciation, when the angel comes by Caravaggio and announces to Mary that this God is going to come and become an embryo. He's going to humble himself. He's going to stoop to us. That's the wonderful message of the gospel. And the theme of humility doesn't end there with the story of Jesus either. When we see the disciples arguing about, well, who's the greatest? What does Jesus do? He puts on a robe and starts to wash their feet and takes the lowest position in the room, humbles himself to serve them. That's what a good king does for the benefit of others. Jesus is starting to show people what true power and authority actually looks like. It's not for the benefit of the self, it's for the benefit of others. And Jesus, this king, is coming through, but he's a humble king. Yes, he's the great king. In fact, it says in that passage, I think, when he serves, it says, knowing who he was and where he was going. I mean, he's a king you don't want to mess with. But he humbles himself to serve for the benefit of us. Even in his arrest, when Jesus gets arrested, the soldiers dress him up as a king. They put a scepter in his hand. You see the scepter thing from Judah. The scepter won't depart. But it's a mocking way, they're saying. You're not a king. You can't even save yourself. What kind of king are you? And then this king is nailed to a cross. Next picture. You could put it on the whole scale. Great, thank you. That's the Eisenhower altarpiece. It's a massive piece of artwork, this. Massive. And it was originally done, I think, for a hospice where people were suffering from some kind of plague or something. And so Jesus' body is particularly disfigured. But, in our sort of 21st century, we probably can't fathom what it looked like to see someone actually crucified before our very eyes on the street. But Jesus was there, disfigured. What kind of king is this? And then he gets the sign above his cross, doesn't he? If you know that sign that said, King of the Jews. And it said it in 3 different languages. And one writer said that it was written in 3 languages so no one could miss the joke. How comical. All that was promised. Here, an angel coming to Mary saying this, and the promises of a king who would endure, whose throne would go on forever and ever, and yet here he hangs on a cross, dead, ripped apart, butchered, slaughtered. They're words that would capture Jesus. Are you the expected one? Even John the Baptist asks. The one that Elizabeth and Zacharias gave birth to. The one that knew Jesus. The one that maybe grew up with him, Are you really the one, actually? Are you the one that's expected? And you can see why, actually, that people would mock and say, well, this Christianity, these claims. But maybe you know the phrase that she or he who laughs last laughs longest. Because he's not a failed king. He's the king who is raised. That's why the resurrection is God's yes. Because death couldn't hold him. He wasn't hanging on the cross for his own wrongdoing. He was hanging there for us in our place. He bears the consequences. Again, we think about exile, being put out from the presence of God. Well, Jesus was crucified outside the city. He bore our exile, if you like, away from God, away from the presence of God and access to God. Jesus says, well, I'm going to bear that for you. So now you, if you want to, you can come back to him. You can come back to that place, as it were, in relationship with God. And that's what he claims. Through his death and resurrection, we can follow the good king and come home. And this incarnation means in the flesh. It's just a big no to our sort of silly self-attempts at saving ourselves, rescuing ourselves, sorting ourselves out, making ourselves into the image that we want to be. God says, no, let me, by grace, come to you and do what you cannot do for yourself. That's who we have here being declared to Mary. That's who's promised. That's who is coming for you, for me. So how does Mary respond? Well, he's the one who's worthy of our worship. Mary's worship. A few things about that, because later on she'll go and sing. She said, one, it flows from being graced. It says, the angel came. And I realize, look, angels and all that, if you've got questions about the whole supernatural thing, please come and chat with us. I'd love to talk to you about that. But look, the angel comes to her and says that you are the favored one. You're the graced one. And in one sense, her response and everything that was going to happen to her was because she understands the grace of God for her personally. She doesn't deserve it. She didn't expect it. But she received it. And the question is, have we? So Mary's worship flows from being graced by God. Mary's worship is wholehearted. Because remember that quote at the beginning? We will worship. You will worship someone or something. You will give your life for. Mary's worship is wholehearted. She says, at the end there, she says, well, let it be done, as the word says. Let it be done. In other words, your will be done. She surrenders. And it changed her life, and it wasn't convenient, was it? It's a pretty radical change. It's like, whoa, hang on a minute. This grace thing, I thought, like, can I not carry on living the way I want? Can I carry on doing what I want with my life? And no, this changes you. It's not convenient. It's not to be an add-on to our lives. It disturbs our lives. It changed Mary's life. And so the question we have to ask is, what does receiving this grace from God and what does wholehearted worship actually look like? In Romans 12, it talks about this whole thing of offer up your whole life, your whole body as an act of worship. It's not just singing songs. We do sing. But it's actually total. Everything, your whole life. It was for Mary, and it's meant to be for us as well. It's kind of all-consuming, if you like. But it's for our ultimate good. And so a question for us might be, well, in light of this Jesus, in light of who Jesus is, what does following him look like for you? What does a kind of, okay, your way, like Mary said, your will be done, not mine. I'm going to surrender to your will be done. What does it look like for you in your life right now where you are? Her worship was wholehearted. And finally, her worship was expressed in singing as well. And we're going to get to Mary's song in a couple of weeks' time as she starts to overflow from this grace that's given her, from submitting to God's will in her life. She starts to sing and worship and celebrate all that God has done for her. And that's why we sing. Ben and band, do you guys want to come back up? It's been said that the person who sings prays twice. I like that. When we sing, we pray twice. In other words, it's not just our heads, it's our hearts are engaged with it. And so I want to invite us to, if you're able to stand, we're going to sing a song. And this will be our response, if you like. To who this promised king is, the one. And we're going to sing a song by a chap called Matt Redman. It's called I Will Offer Up My Life. And there's a line we're going to sing, in surrender I must give my every part. Lord, receive the sacrifice of a broken heart. In surrender I must give my every part. Look, when we talk about wholeheartedness and all the rest of it, I am very aware of my own weakness and failing and where I fall short. I'm very aware of that. The reason that doesn't depress me is because, first, I know I've been graced by God in Christ. And that's my position. And so even when God does sort of put his finger on some things, I know it's utterly for my good. It's because he wants me to make me into the image, the original that's been lost, into the image of his son. So often we're trying to protect our own image, with others. Oh, my image and what people think of me. And God comes and ruins that one, thankfully. He does, in order to restore his image, the true image, if you like, in you, who you are meant to be for him. So, Lord, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the richness of the story, Lord, and these dots that are joined throughout it. Where the picture just gets clearer and clearer and richer and deeper as we start to understand some of these things. Lord, who you are amazes us. And like Mary, we just want to respond by saying, well, Lord, yeah, my life's yours. You kind of do with it what you want. That verse that Tom shared earlier, that God does what he pleases. But it's ultimately for our good. Let's worship.